Good morning. On behalf of the NC Chamber and Lyft, welcome to Connect Your Community, Breaking Barriers with Accessible Transportation. I am Janelle Boyd with the NC Chamber. All attendees are muted to avoid any distractions during today's presentation. If time permits, we will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. If you would like to ask a question during the meeting, please use the clapping hands reaction button at the bottom of the screen. When selected, we will unmute you. Please do not use the chat box. Now, I would like to invite Anthony Foxx, Megan Serjane Samples, and John Stoddard from Lyft to discuss the topic of accessible transportation. For our panel today, Megan Serjane Samples is the Senior Public Policy Manager for the Southeast region of Lyft. Anthony Foxx, former Charlotte Mayor and United States Secretary of Transportation under President Obama. He's the current Chief Policy Officer and Senior Advisor to President and CEO of Lyft. And John Stoddard, Community Organizer at Lyft. Megan, the floor is yours.
I will actually hand it over to my colleague, John, to start us off. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So happy to see so many people were able to join us. Thank you, Megan, for passing it along to me. We're going to go through a brief agenda here, just so everyone knows kind of what you're getting yourselves into. So we're going to start by giving everyone on the call an overview of some of the Lyft Up community programs that we have going on in North Carolina, before moving on to some of the local partnerships we fostered in North Carolina. We'll then be moving over to our conversation we'll be having with Anthony Foxx. And then, as we were just discussed, we'll try to answer as many questions as we can moving forward. You can go to the next slide. So here at Lyft, our mission is to provide people with the best transportation, not the most transportation, the best transportation. We believe that transportation is more than just a ride from point A to point B. It's something that factors naturally into your life and helps you really achieve what you want moving forward. And a lot of the social impact programs that we'll be talking about today help address the needs in the communities to help people kind of achieve what they need to while pushing forward kind of a greater sense of community. All of our social impact programs kind of fall under the banner of Lyft Up. As I mentioned before, we're trying to expand our transportation and focus it down to the people who need it most. This can take the form of free or discounted rides through our partner organizations to make sure that the people who need transportation face no problems in actually accessing that transportation, while also giving back to the community through our Lyft drivers who are able to then find a way to earn additional or more income in order to help support themselves. It's really kind of a win-win for the community on all fronts. And these kind of programs are run a broad range of purposes, from jobs and grocery access programs to civic access programs, as we've seen with the most recent Get Out the Vote efforts, to even disaster response. We've worked heavily in the area with COVID-19 response, and in some regions, bike share access, such in New York with the City Bike program, has really proved vital in connecting people in ways that once larger public transit started to need to be shut down, they were able to kind of use bike share access to supplement these programs. And then finally, community grants and councils really allows us to not only work directly with the community, but hear from our community and not make changes that would negatively impact kind of what's going on the ground in individual locations. We don't want to be blind and deaf to the problems that are going on today. And these community grants and councils really help us kind of dig deep into those areas. More specifically, in North Carolina, we've done a lot with both COVID-19 relief, helping UNC healthcare systems access groups and help doctors and nurses get to and from their jobs. Like I said, in some regions where mass transit started to become harder to do, or people wanted to, possibly be on the roads less, whatever it might have looked like, we were able to kind of step in and bridge that gap. Our Jobs Access program, we've been working with Year Up in Charlotte, as well as the Goodwill in Winston-Salem, to kind of make sure that people have access to their careers, right? And with Year Up, it also took that next step of helping people find training and other opportunities to push their what might have been their pre-existing career forward or make that change. We say that those trainings are what's going to drive the economy forward next. When you're looking at jobs these days that are pushing these higher and higher qualifications, this is a way to connect community members to resources that they might not normally have, and while also giving out back to our workforce, allowing them to, again, connect, make money, and kind of further their own opportunities, whether it be a second or smaller business. Our grocery access, also in North Carolina, was based in Charlotte, working with an organization called Loaves and Fishes to make sure that, again, we're constantly pushing back into the community and making sure people are not limited by what transportation they can and can't, manage to connect themselves to. We're working daily to make sure that we're becoming the first and last mile providers for a lot of the public transportation systems. And that's something that Megan will talk about further on. And of course, some of these feed into our national partnerships. We've got, through our Access Alliance, fantastic relationships with a lot of social justice organizations and it's things like the National Urban League, the NAACP, and what we've been working with, as we saw a lot of unrest during the summer, is to make sure that people are not facing the limits of their transportation. I know I keep harping on this point, but that is essential to what we do here at Lyft, is making sure that transportation never becomes a limiting factor. Like we discussed, whether it be grocery store or food banks, we've launched several fantastic programs, whether it be down here in Atlanta, where I'm located, connecting people to local food banks, or like I said, up in North Carolina, working with groups like Loaves and Fishes or Goodwill to make sure that people still have access to their job when other circumstances might have arisen. We're also doing things like working with individuals released on bail to make sure that they can meet those regular check-ins, or things finding shelters for those facing domestic problems at home, in order to make sure, again, if you need to get out of a bad situation or you need that transportation to continue to push yourself forward, you will always have a home and a ride here with Lyft. And this is where I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Megan, to talk a little bit more about some of our transit partnerships and some of our other local efforts.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. So really, it's the great work that John and his team do, as well as the social impact team do, by investing in the communities in which we operate in, that help us foster and develop strong and meaningful relationships with government agencies and elected officials. So I want to highlight just a few of our transit partnerships that we have right here in North Carolina. One is that we launched in early August of 2019, where Go Triangle and Lyft partner to increase transit ridership by easing transit connections for riders in the Research Triangle Park area. As part of the RTP Connect program, riders can receive $10 off Lyft rides as long as the rides go to or from the Regional Transit Center and occur within the designated program area. The program provides riders more flexibility, convenience, and effectively extend the reach of the transit to destinations that were previously difficult to reach. In addition, in February 2020, the city of Durham launched the East Durham Connect with Lyft. This allows residents in a few neighborhoods in East Durham to take a Lyft ride between their homes and bus stops or shopping centers nearby. Customers can use the Lyft ride to connect to the Go Durham bus service at bus stops near the Village Shopping Center. And riders get up to $25 off each ride for up to 50 rides a month. Lastly, East Durham Connect pilot program replaces the fixed route service that Go Durham Route 3C now provides between NC 98 and US 70 on Wedgedale Avenue and Ivywood Lane. Customers can use their smartphones and a code to take a Lyft ride between 6 a.m. and 7 p.m. Monday through Saturday from within a zone along Holloway Street. Really, I want to highlight, this is part of our effort to provide the world's best transportation and find that first and last mile solutions for transit. And really, we're a partner with existing public transportation and supplementing the great efforts that they already have there. Next slide, please. I want to highlight one of our public safety campaigns that we have. So this is the third year now that Lyft has partnered with the Governor's Highway Safety Association to encourage individuals who consume alcohol and other impairing substances to use rideshare rather than put themselves and others at risk on the road. And this year, North Carolina was selected to be part of that program. So between December 14th and January 3rd of 2021, in the evening, and I will add in compliance with the governor's executive order, people can use keys free NC to get $10 off Lyft ride credits for patrons. So I'm going to repeat that again so you can write it down, share it with all your friends, family, and loved ones so they stay safe this season. It's keys free NC. So this is just another great program that we highlight, and it's really, I'm really, really happy that North Carolina is part of it this year. Next slide, please. And continuing with public safety, as this is paramount to Lyft and the work that we do. Last legislative session, we worked really, really closely with Majority Leader John Bell here in North Carolina to pass some really meaningful legislation that allows us to add more tools to our toolbox to ensure that both riders and passengers are safe while using Lyft transportation. Within this, it requires that all TNC drivers have an illuminated trade dress, which we call the AMP. And in response to this, before it was required that all drivers have this, we actually worked to roll this program out prior to the law going into effect. And this was the first time that we ever worked on something like this. And we actually did a Lyft driver AMP distribution event, and it was wildly successful. We had over 500 drivers show up to learn more about safety, as well as pick up an AMP for their vehicle. We got great press around it. Leader Bell came out and joined us and handed out some AMPs to some drivers. And it was just really, really well received and well attended. We had hoped to continue this and do more around the state, but of course, COVID had to happen and go ahead and ruin everything once again. But we really look forward to continuing these conversations with our drivers, promoting safety for not only our passengers, but the drivers on the platform, and continue some programs around this. So really, really exciting, and hope to do some more work like this in North Carolina. Next slide, please. And now to what the main event, what we're all really here for, is to hear from our Chief Policy Officer and Senior Advisor to our CEO and President. I like to refer to him as the boss. But Anthony, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you for a conversation with the NC Chamber.
Hi, everybody. Megan, thanks so much. Thanks to the whole Lyft team for this presentation, and for those of you at the North Carolina Chamber and a few of our other partners across North Carolina. It's really great to be with you this morning. I obviously have a very fond view of North Carolina, and we are looking as a company to do more in North Carolina. And so the conversation today, I hope, takes as many turns as all of you are willing to offer up for us. Let me just say that a lot of what Megan and others have talked about here in terms of our commitment to not only North Carolina, but also our commitment to being a good corporate citizen. I think those points, I think, have been made extremely well. I'll just double down on a couple of them. Number one is that we see ourselves as a complement to the existing transportation ecosystem. And that's why you hear us talking about the partnerships with some of the transit agencies in North Carolina, because we know that despite the best efforts of our transit leaders across the state, that there are still places and corners of communities that are not touched by transit, that where people need to get connected to that last mile to the bus stop, or from the bus stop to wherever they happen to be. And these partnerships that we're developing seem to be going well, and really, frankly, complementary to what the transit agencies themselves do. The second point is that there are a number of issues that are facing us right now. I know that all of us are struggling with the public health crisis that exists, but quite another one of those crises that we've seen over the course of the year has to do with the economy, and also with with racial justice. And in both respects, if you think about it, people at the margins are spending the most of their money on housing, but the second largest expense for most families is their transportation costs. And what our platform offers us all a chance to do is to decouple transportation from owning cars, and so we see an opportunity in North Carolina to not only build our business out even greater, but also through the corporate citizenship work we do to help people who need a hand up with opportunities to use our platform through some of the partnerships we've talked about. And also, as part of that, I think it necessarily touches in on some of the economic issues that are particular to African American and people of color. So we're really excited about this conversation, and I really am looking forward to more of a discussion. So I think we have a slide here that tees up a few questions that we wanted to sort of prompt you as conversation starters, and then we can certainly get into any discussion you want. Um, let's see, I think it's coming up. So the questions here are basically, again, these are conversation starters. We're happy to talk about anything you guys want to talk about. But question one is about transportation barriers and where you're hearing and seeing these pop up across the state. Uh, Question two has to do with how businesses and economic development efforts are impacted by transportation access. The more specific cases you can offer up, I think the better we can respond. And if we don't have an answer right away, we're happy to go back and noodle on it and come back with some ideas. And then third, uh, we recognize that you all have many corporate partnerships and you have many relationships, and sometimes those can be helpful and effective, and sometimes they aren't as effective. And we want to be effective in terms of how we partner with you. And so we really want to get your ideas on best practices and things you've seen work well, and things perhaps that haven't worked quite as well. So why don't we open it up and look forward to the questions, and we'll do the best we can to answer.
As a reminder, you can use the clap reaction button at the bottom of your screen if you have a question or comment.
I know this is not a shy group, so wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, Megan.
Okay, I'll jump in here.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk, so never not call on me. How do you see us in the future continuing to foster and build relationships in North Carolina? And what do you think that we could do better in North Carolina?
I wanted to learn a little bit more about the questions that you guys have already on the screen, but in specifically with rural areas, the area that I'm in is extremely rural, and the need or the desire from the potential new entrepreneurs to become Lyft drivers, because they are using their personal vehicles and things like that. So can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure, I'm happy to have one of our team members talk a little bit about some of the rural partnerships that we have, and you know, we do have them across the country, and I'm not sure how much we're doing there in North Carolina, but let me ask one of my team members.
I can speak to, this is John, in case you could not see. I can speak a little bit to rural partnerships. While we're limited in what we're doing in North Carolina, if we're, like Anthony said, we're looking to grow that area. In other areas, we do have several rural partnerships, you know, down here in Georgia, where I'm currently located. We're working with several more rural food banks as part of a larger coalition to provide access to and from individual food banks, obviously, in the area. One of the things that really helps that out is a great network with an individual food bank, because what it allows us to do is pass over those codes or credits to provide those, you know, free and changing rides, right? To allow them to then connect to an individual person, because they know those people best, right? We can't design a one-size-fits-all solution for all of the citizens in North Carolina, but we can help tailor your response, right? So when it comes to an individual entrepreneur or small business working with something like the North Carolina Chamber to then access these smaller communities or more diasporated communities to then link them in would allow, is kind of how we've approached the topic in the past. Because you're just rolling up to community and then dropping a bunch of ride codes and then taking a step back and saying goodbye, have a great rest of your year, doesn't work, because if something goes wrong and we don't have that ongoing community and ongoing communication, then not only are you guys not benefiting, but we're not living up to what we said we're going to do, right? Our job is to provide the best transportation, and if it's just us kind of, you know, giving those blank credits, it doesn't work. We can't kind of fulfill that mission. Does that kind of help answer the question?
John, I think that's great. I think the point is we are as interested in learning about how we can plug in to help create connections in rural North Carolina. So we don't come at this with like a playbook and say, you know, here's you know, the 2 or 3 things that we can do. We would prefer to help work with you and identify where problem areas are and see what we can come up with together to try to solve it. I certainly know, you know, just I didn't get into my own biography here, but while I was born and raised in Charlotte, I spent a lot of time in my grandmother's hometown of Carthage, North Carolina, over in the Sandhills in Moore County, and I know from that experience just what it's like to be you know, to some extent in a place where you're oftentimes trying to get, you know, from where you live to a work opportunity or to school or whatever it is, and if you don't have a car in places like that, you really are you know, going to be not as mobile, not as able to take advantage of those opportunities that may exist in the next county over or the next town over or something like that. So it's an issue that we certainly want to engage with you on, and we look forward to doing that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Anthony, I'll add to that too. You know, a big barrier that we have in these rural areas is driver supply. You know, we don't want to institute a program or put a code out there and not have the driver accessible to be able to pick them up and take these people to the places that they need to go. So that's why great corporate partnerships are so important to help identify these areas so we can do driver recruitment and work with y'all to make sure that we're serving these communities, but we're actually serving them. And we're not, like my colleague John said, that we're not just throwing a ride code at the problem, we're making sure there is actually a transportation solution available to them.
Thank you.
One other thing I will mention is that, you know, given the economic challenges many areas are experiencing as a result of COVID. I know, um, for a time there when we were all shut down, nobody was driving anywhere. So I'm sure that that has had an impact to some extent on gas taxes or parking fees that many of the cities rely on, or other ways government develops revenue. My guess is that um, North Carolina, like many states, is feeling somewhat of the brunt of that. And it's in a time like this where we have to be creative and try to figure out how to problem solve. And I wonder whether you're seeing any budget challenges within the state, either at the state level or perhaps at the local level, that may be constraining some of our transportation systems, either road construction or even transit in various parts of North Carolina.
Okay. I do have a question from the audience.
Okay.
Um, uh, the audience member would like to know, do you work with educational institutions like community colleges to identify areas and businesses with the greatest needs? And if so, what has that looked like in other states?
I'll start and then others can join. But first, we actually have a number of relationships with colleges and community colleges themselves. A lot of times, they have an incentive to help students avoid, um, you know, driving under the influence and various things. And so we have direct partnerships with colleges and universities and community colleges all over the country, and would love to engage with building out more. We actually have a few in North Carolina, including my alma mater, Davidson. So definitely we want to have that conversation. In terms of identifying areas of need within communities where a college or university may be situated, I do know that we have had some academic partnerships in the past. Uh, and I'm trying to think about ones. I know that we've done some work with Cornell, with Carnegie Mellon, and a few other institutions on various issues, not necessarily around transportation access or need, but that's an area that, again, we are happy to explore if there's a willingness on the part of this group.
I'll hop in to speak to that kind of latter point about using these institutions to determine need. As I mentioned before, those community institutions that have been around, longer than we have, really are embedded in the community and know a lot better and in a lot finer grained detail what's going on. So we've not only worked with educational institutions, but as I've mentioned before, a wide variety of groups because they know their constituents best. But specifically with education, we've gone even deeper than the actual, community college level to, even just public school systems in general to provide code and transportation access to not just students, but faculty members as well. We've also come up with innovative solutions to provide technology using, allowing kids and their families to get in the Lyft ride to go to pick up laptops or whatever they might need to as we transition into this remote learning environment. Those programs have come fully by working in close communication with these educational partners because they're the ones who know at the end of the day which families are going to need the help or which faculty might need the rides to and from when the transportation systems need to be closed down for cleaning or if they're just not running or Lord knows traffic is still a killer. So that being said, we're, as Anthony mentioned, we're really always excited when we can work closely with any kind of organization, and education ones are often some of the most rewarding.
Thank you for that, John. Looks like Paula, do you have another question?
I do. So you mentioned you partner with food banks. What about the local government, so county and townships? to provide, again, that access and opportunity for both the future drivers as well as to the community.
Sure. I don't know, John, Megan, you guys want to take that one? It's a great question.
Yeah, I can hop in, and then John, feel free to fill in as needed if I miss anything. But that's a number one priority for us at Lyft is to work with localities, not just for ride sharing transportation, but just mobility across the board. So we really work with micromobility, which is our scooter program. We also have a bike program as well. Then we also have in-app transit partnerships as well. So it's streamless through the app where you can connect through public transit. And then for that last mile, maybe you're hopping on a bike or a scooter to get to where you need to go or taking a ride share. We're currently, thanks to Anthony, working to launch a new program with the city of Raleigh. As I mentioned earlier in our program, we already have existing partnerships with Durham, with the East Durham Connect, as well as Go Triangle. So we are always looking for more opportunities to expand this work. As we mentioned earlier, we want to complement existing public transportation and supplement the existing transportation that's out there. So absolutely a number one priority. We have a team that we call our transit bike and scooter team here at Lyft, where that is their goal, and reaching out to localities and trying to find better solutions for the community. John, did I miss anything?
You didn't miss anything. You're always fantastic. What I was going to bring to the table, if I could, would be that we also have partnered with kind of these localities in the past to provide, again, those jobs and grocery access that form the backbone of kind of Lyft's social impact programs. Most recently in Miami, we were able to announce a major jobs access program to help people, obviously even impacted by COVID, still find ways to access their livelihoods. And that was done by working directly with the city. While that Miami's not a rural area by any means, it's still something that we can look to do. But like Anthony said, we try not to be a playbook company where we come in and we tell you how we do things elsewhere and then just try to replicate it, because again, building off what Megan said, it all comes down to what resources we have in the area. And often turning to a long-term kind of growth in the area will lead to a better ability for us to serve you guys long-term. And that's kind of what we're all about. The best, not fastest, immediately, right?
Thank you. I believe there was a question from Kaisha McDermott.
Yes, and keeping with the community partners that you guys have in the with the community colleges, what does that look like as far, I guess, if someone has an email or anything that they could send so we could crunch numbers?
Absolutely.
How would we get a partnership started?
Absolutely. We'll make sure to drop an email in the chat here, but also anybody who wants to respond verbally who can work with anybody on this call to develop a partnership. Is that you, John?
Yeah, that was going to be me. I just didn't want to cut you off. Yeah, so I would be most likely the best person to reach out to. I also work very closely with the local operations team, so I'm also able to determine what kind of driver supply we have in the area. So that would be something we'd be able to do together. But I can either drop my email in the chat for everyone, or I had planned on following up with everyone individually following this call anyway. But I'd be more than happy to just fire this along here. If you just want to tell me when you guys see it. You'd think after.
I'm just going to give everybody your personal cell phone number.
I will. I mean,
Right.
I will. I really don't. I don't mind. What else am I doing these days? I stay in my house. I can answer phone calls. Love to talk to people, right?
Yep.
Does everyone see my email? Is that a yay or a nay?
Yes.
Cool. Just wanted to make sure. You'd think after like 9 months I'd have this Zoom thing down, but I am still working on it.
You don't work for a tech company or anything, John. No big deal.
Not at all. I work for a transportation company. Come on now. Does that answer your question? I guess if you're asking who, it would be me. But if you have any other questions that I can kind of prep before we talk, we can always email back and forth.
It does. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have another audience question. Given the impact of the pandemic on our overall health, how much are you working with local healthcare providers and hospitals to facilitate patient transportation? Sick people cannot work, so it's a critical part of the ability of businesses to maintain a functional and healthy workforce.
It's a great question, and the reality is we're doing a lot. We're doing a lot. Helping to get healthcare providers transportation to their workplaces, and we are also working very hard to help get people who need healthcare to their appointments and things in an environment where obviously safety is the primary consideration. I should also say that we intend to be the provider of choice of transportation to people as they try to get vaccinated, and we're working with several communities across the country, and would love to do even more in North Carolina to help with all of those things. So that's the high level. Happy to have Megan and John fill in some of the details specific to North Carolina.
Yeah, I can hop back in here. Our biggest one would be our existing partnership with UNC Health Systems in Chapel Hill. I know that we do a lot facilitating rides to and from. A lot of times these healthcare systems actually have the ability to call rides through our concierge program to enable kind of the easy transport of patients, not just to and from their homes, but often also to and from, whether it be other appointments or finding them placement in assisted living facilities. That being said, we also have sought to explore other partnerships with local groups. I work here in Atlanta with a really great group called Common Courtesy that actually started off just providing rides to and from the cardiac unit of the local Grady Hospital. Before now, they ended up providing, I think, something like 70% of all non-emergency rides. And that is something that I'm incredibly proud of them for being able to facilitate and continue to work with them on. And that's something that I would love to see us find in North Carolina. But again, as Anthony and we keep reiterating, we're really excited to dive into North Carolina and find those partnerships so we can continue to provide this access. Because a lot of times, like you mentioned, not only is it vital for the workforce to stay healthy, but overall the community, right? When we're providing them food and jobs, if their underlying health isn't great, then what's the, what are we doing? We're not starting at square one. So we're really excited to continue to push forward and find these partnerships that we can facilitate better transportation access with.
Yeah, John, and I'll add to that too, and do an ask of this group for help because I'm never afraid to ask for help. So one of our line of businesses, as well as we provide non-emergency medical transportation. North Carolina has been a bit of a barrier for us to enter into this space. Medicaid isn't state administered, it's administered at the local level, and we've had some issues, I guess you could say, navigating that space. So I would love to be connected to the right people to help our Lyft healthcare team in this space as well, because I think the service that we provide in non-emergency medical transportation, especially now during these times of COVID, is really, really important. It's much better for these people who may be immunocompromised or have issues to be in a single ride rather than a bus with a bunch of other people going to doctor's appointments. So non-emergency medical transportation and providing these Medicaid reimbursable rides is really, really, really important for our company and a great service that we provide. We've been able to launch in 15 states around the country, and I really hope that North Carolina can be the next one as a state that I cover and manage.
Thank you. I do have an audience question from Paula, I believe. Paula, would you like to ask your question?
I'm sorry, no, I do not.
Okay, all right, thank you. I do have another audience member question. I know transportation funding has been discussed during this webinar. The Chamber has launched a coalition called Destination 2030 to advocate for modernized and diversified revenue streams for our transportation network. Um, this actually is a statement that discusses a transportation coalition that we have, and it has a link in the chat for everyone. Sorry, I
That's
just
great.
saw that. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, it's really, really helpful. Thanks for sharing that. And I think the only comment I would have without having studied the Destination 2030 extensively is that so much of what we've done with transportation in the last 100 years has been the use of public funding to support it. And there have been private efforts. I mean, obviously, the industries that have built up around aviation and around the automobile and even transit and rail have come from the private sector. And you have like these new entrants that are coming along, like um, Hyperloop and space travel and all sorts of things that are coming in. So the private sector is involved in and has traditionally been involved in coming up with modalities, and the public has oftentimes come in to help create the connective tissue for those modalities to help people get from one place to another. What I would say about initiatives like Destination 2030 is there's now growing an opportunity to involve the private sector in the actual implementation of plans. So, we talked a lot of today about transit partnerships, about what we call micromobility. It's a fancy word for walking, biking, using scooters, and so forth. And I would urge consideration of ensuring that that not only the public inputs are counted and thought about, but also the private inputs, because there's an awful private sector transportation operating companies in some of what's being thought about. So that's just a thought to share, and I will read the paper that you just linked us to with great interest.
Thank you. Are there any more audience questions?
Janelle, it's Kelly Fuller. Matt, I've got my computer working.
Yay. Hi, Kelly.
Yay. So, Secretary Foxx, I really appreciate you spending time with us today. I struggle with my computer. I am president of the North Carolina Chamber Foundation, and there are times that if I accidentally hit the mute button, I am forever and ever amen muted. So I got off the call and I came back on. First, I just want to thank you for your time today. It's just been very interesting to hear about what Lyft is doing, not just what y'all want to do here, but what you're doing around the country. And I just want to piggyback a little bit on what you were just talking about with Destination 2030. I would love your big picture perspective on where you see transportation going in the future, and how that will impact communities like we're talking about today. Especially in our state, as you well know, we have these huge pockets of metropolitan expansion. I mean, like bananas expansion. Mm-hmm. And then we have these just tons and tons of our areas that are not just suburban, but are extremely rural. Mm-hmm. And lots of times what we're pointing out in Destination 2030 and with our study is a lot of those roads are not so great in our rural areas. They're really struggling with safety and the like. So I would love just your big picture perspective on where you see transportation going, not just from a funding perspective, but how businesses can work together more with the public sector and the educational sector to create these partnerships that will really, because I really believe that the only way we're going to kind of get out of a lot of these ditches that we're in now is through collaboration and community partnerships. And so, yay to Lyft for wanting to partner with many of us in the nonprofit sector. But I would just love your perspective. So that was a long kind of but I would just appreciate your thoughts.
No, Kelly, thank you so much, and it's great to join you. And don't sweat the computer problems. I'm often struggling with my computer myself, so I totally understand. To your question, I would say that in particular with North Carolina in mind. Well, let me step back. Nationally, what's happening is a silent migration, and I don't know how COVID has actually changed it for the longer term. But prior to COVID, what we were seeing was an out migration from areas in the Northeast and the Midwest, and an in migration into the Southeast and the Southwestern United States. And so places like North Carolina, Texas, Florida, are experiencing like a huge explosion of population. And what that's doing is, it's, as you pointed out, you have these hungry metropolitan areas that are gobbling up more landmass. And it's not just, jurisdictionally, it's not just through annexation. It's just that the populations are starting to collect around those centers. So Greensboro, Durham, Raleigh, Asheville, Wilmington, Charlotte, those areas are bigger today than they were 20 years ago. So whereas a place like Cornelius might have been considered suburban or maybe even rural, a while ago, it's now becoming quasi-urban, and so you're seeing more areas that are more kind of rural becoming less rural as a result of that growth. So that's one unique problem. And then the other problem that you pointed out was the increasing isolation of some of our rural communities, both as a result of poor infrastructure, but also as a result of where the economy seems to be concentrating. So how do we solve it? I think the first thing is that transportation cannot be thought of in isolation from the economic, the educational, all of the variables that contribute to an area being economically attractive. I think the state has to have a real thought leadership discussion around what do we want this state to look like. If you grow up and you're in Manteo or Murphy, where do you want those job opportunities to settle down for people who live in those places? And then think about how the transportation system should connect those things. Now, as a very generic matter, what I would say is a couple of things. One, I would tie my transportation goals to overall performance goals for the state. So if there's an economic measure, if there's an environmental measure, if there's a housing measure, I would have those measures as part of an overall program for the state. Secondly, and so you can measure how are we doing from year to year against those measures, and how is the transportation system either contributing or taking away opportunities against those measurements that we have for the state. Um, Secondly, I think all states should be a whole lot less chauvinistic about the mode of transportation. I think typically we've thought of roads as being the primary form of transportation, and that's been true. But understand that almost by definition means that people are going to be spending the second highest amount of their pocketbook on owning a car. So, can we go back to a little bit of the old school vision of having a more connected rail system that would carry, North Carolina will eventually have a Northwest rail connection to Virginia and to South Carolina and Georgia. But can we even imagine an east-west connection in North Carolina that would enable people to get more closely connected to jobs? And I think that's something that has been talked about for a very long time. But because we've invested so heavily in the road network, we haven't given ourselves room to think about it. So I think we should be a lot more mode neutral, and really think more openly about what will help us. Third, uh, you know, the economy. You know, I think we have the relationship between the MPO, RPO communities and the state transportation decision making. I have always believed that at the federal level we should have put additional money. So if we keep the maintenance of effort in the state programs, but if we get big additional amounts of money, we should really be setting these MPOs and RPOs up so that they can actually deliver projects. Right now, they're not able to do that, and that also gets to how you could put more investment into rural areas and some of these areas that have become more urban but are still sort of stuck with farm to market road systems. How do you do that? I think you do it a little bit by giving the local communities a little more uh, resources and the ability to actually let projects. Very few MPOs in North Carolina, if any, actually do that. A lot of them are kind of giving signals to the state about which ones to prioritize. But if you look around the country, there are MPOs and RPOs that are they operate as little mini DOTs, and they actually do deliver projects. And it takes money, it takes resources, and a lot of communities don't have those resources, which is why I think at the federal level, I would be pushing hard for more resources and a significant portion of those greater resources going into these local MPOs and RPOs to give them the infrastructure to do projects. Um, those are just some thoughts off the top of my head. I think in terms of one final point, somewhat parochial point, is that again, we were once in a time when this is a little bit like sports. I hate to use sports analogies, but there was a time when when a city would own a stadium for a football team, and it would be called like the city of whatever stadium. And now we've gotten to a point where cities might help build it, but it's got a name of a corporate partner on it, and the private sector is finding ways to put its name on everything. Well, that may be a bad example, but the example I'm really talking about is in transportation. I think there are so many opportunities to leverage what the private sector is trying to do. We are probably 10 years out from some significant deployment of autonomous vehicles, but that will be a watershed moment and a huge opportunity to take some impact away from a lot of people who are spending a lot of money on their car, to give them a system that would allow them to buy the trips rather than having to buy the physical car. So how do we build an ecosystem together that allows government and the private sector to work together to put a little economic pressure off of our community, and to actually see some of the advances that are coming take place. So um, I would also urge just pulling a few of these companies in to say, hey, what can you do to help us solve some of our transportation problems, and how can we do that in such a way that it works for you and works for us, because there are a ton of companies out here doing stuff. I was just sorry. I'll stop talking in a minute, but I was talking to a company called Zipline, and this is not related to surface transportation, but they're actually working with Novant Health to deliver medicine in rural parts of North Carolina using drones. And that's an example of what I'm talking about. There's a lot of stuff out here in transportation, which, if utilized at the government level, would take pressure off of budgets, pressure off of citizens who are paying for transportation today, and increase quality of life, frankly. So hopefully those ideas are helpful. Sorry to go on.
That's one reason why I wanted to pick your brain, because you have seen the world from a Charlotte perspective. You've seen the world from the DC and national perspective. Now you're working, in the corporate world. And so that's very much why I wanted to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much. You're probably aware, our chairman, Ward, and I lives, eats, sleeps, breathes this stuff. And so I'm sure that, he's thinking, how do I bring in the corporate world to help us fund our rather large deficit hole and our needs for going forward. So thank you so much. That was excellent.
Thank you. Great seeing you.
And I have some thoughts on that healthcare the Medicaid, and maybe we can connect later, but there's certainly people here who would love to have transportation helping with getting people just to their everyday doctor's visits, which have really been sidelined out of fear and that kind of thing. And at the chamber, we very much want to encourage people to get back and get their normal routine visits and make sure, if you have cancer treatment, you got to get in there and get this stuff done. I mean, because we're going to be faced with much less healthy people down the road and some really significant costs as well. So we're happy to, maybe connect you with some thoughts on that.
That'd be great. That would be a huge watershed for the state and for us, frankly, to get that figured out.
Yeah, Kelly, I would love to connect with you on that. Working in the NEMT space for Lyft is one of the more prouder things that I get to work on. And it's one of the most tangible things when you see the impact that you have on people's lives. As you know, if you miss, one dialysis appointment, it can have devastating effects on people. So us to be able to work in that space, is something that I'm very, very proud of to work on at Lyft. So thank you, Kelly. Really, really would love to connect with you offline on that.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm afraid I've just rambled on for most of this time, so I'm going to turn it back over to John and Megan to close us out. I know we promised you we would conclude by the end of the hour. So Kelly and all of you who've interacted here, thanks so much. It's great to visit with you, and I love my home state, so it's always good to join you guys.
Yes, thank you everybody for having us here today. We really, really appreciate it. It's great to have these conversations and to collaborate and find solutions together for the great state of North Carolina. I'm heavily invested, even though I'm based here in Florida. Majority of my family lives in North Carolina, so very deep rooted in the state, and really look forward to continuing the conversations with everybody.
And I guess I'll pitch my last little bit of closing here for Lyft. It was absolutely fantastic to get to talk to everyone today, answer questions. Like I said, I'll be following up with everyone. I did throw my email in the chat as requested, so please feel free to reach out if you don't hear from me first. But just an absolute pleasure to get to talk to me with everyone.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Megan, and thank you, John, for your time today. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's presentation on Connect Your Community, Breaking Barriers with Accessible Transportation, sponsored by Lyft. We hope you found today's content valuable. You will receive a brief survey of the webinar via email. We would appreciate any feedback you can provide to allow us to improve these sessions. The recording of today's webinar will be made available to you via email within 24 hours of the webinar. Thank you. Stay safe and healthy during this time. Take care all.